1,071 days since his last pole position.
He's gone again. Oh, that's a big crash.
What happened to Honda? They're the most successful team in Premier Class racing history, with 25 championships and over 300 wins across the years. Fast forward to today though, Honda can barely score points, and they always seem to be running at the back of the grid. So what went wrong? Well, a huge part of the reason is this guy here, the one and only Marc Marquez. He was Honda's most valuable asset, which unfortunately came at a cost of everything else. So, chances are you've heard of Marc Marquez and Honda, and it was quite literally a match made in heaven. Similar to things like Michael Schumacher and Ferrari or Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, they were unstoppable and almost made for each other. But let's quickly learn a little bit more about how dominant Honda have been in the Premier Class of motorbike racing over the years. Honda got its first ever win in the 125cc Grand Prix class all the way back in 1961 at the Spanish Grand Prix. Tom Phillips took their first ever win, and the Australian took the 125cc championship that year as well. Mike Hailwood also took the 250cc championship for Honda in the same year, and over the next few years, Honda dominated in every single class of the Grand Prix Championship, apart from the top class, which at the time were using 500cc engines. They didn't actually enter the top class until 1966, where they were looking for yet another championship. Unfortunately, this all came to an end when Jim Redman, who after winning the first two races of the season, crashed in Belgium and broke his wrist. And after all that, at the end of the 66 season, Honda decided they'd had enough and wanted to focus on selling road-going motorbikes instead. And they didn't come back into the Premier Class until 1977 with the NR500. Now, Honda likes to go against the grain, which, by the way, you'll see a pattern of this a little bit later on. Anyways, the NR500 was no exception. You see, in the late 70s, two-stroke engines was the norm. Four-stroke engines had been phased out in motorbike racing. They just weren't as good. But Honda decided to enter with a four-stroke engine anyway. Unfortunately, it was rubbish. It was pulled from racing in 1981, and they went back to the drawing board and came back with the two-stroke powered NS500. It didn't take long for it to prove itself, and in 1983, Freddie Spencer claimed the first 500cc championship on a Honda. The NS500 showed what Honda was doing was working, and in 1984, the NSR 500 debuted. And what a bike it was. From 1984 through to 2002, it took 11 Riders' Championships and 14 Constructors' titles. One of the more memorable runs of dominance was Mick Doohan taking back-to-back championships from 1994 to 1998. After the turn of the century, Honda took another two championships with Valentino Rossi, riding the new RC211V in 2002 and 2003. Which, don't get me wrong, is impressive, but what's even more impressive was for both of those seasons, 5 of the top 10 bikes in the championship standings were Honda. A few more championships came to Honda over the next few years from Nicky Hayden and Casey Stoner, but after Stoner retired at the end of the 2012 season, a seat was available, and that was given to Marc Marquez. So, how dominant was Marc Marquez during his time at Honda? And why on earth is he a major reason why Honda are now the backmarkers of MotoGP? Well, let me explain. Between 2013 and 2023, Honda won 72 races. Take a guess on how many times a rider other than Marc Marquez won. Just 13. Marc won 59 times. Now again, this might not seem like much of an issue. Just stay with me. Honda obviously saw the utter dominance of Marquez and sort of left him to it. They kept updating the bike to what suited him. A sort of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing. Now, the RC213V was a notoriously difficult bike to ride. That's been the way with Honda for a fair few years, and this was reported by multiple riders. Even HRC boss Nakamoto, back in 2014, said our bike this year was more difficult to ride than the 2013 bike. So it's not like it was something that was flying under the radar. Everyone from the boss to the riders knew it wasn't easy. So you'd think if multiple riders were saying the bike is hard to ride, as well as the boss himself, Honda would be trying to fix things. Well, Honda didn't do that. In fact, they did the complete opposite. They just doubled down on Marquez being able to ride the Honda in such a way that he could make it do what he wanted. The RC213V was a machine you had to beat into submission. And Mark was someone who could extract every little bit of performance out of that bike, plus a little bit more. In fact, he was such a unique rider, his data was completely useless to his teammates. Former MotoGP rider Cal Crutchlow said in an interview, Danny says that he's making it all under brakes, but he's making it everywhere. It's not even worth looking at. Honestly, you look at the data, you might as well throw it in the bin. You're just looking at a load of squiggly lines. It's just ridiculous. There's nothing positive for me because you look at the lap time and say this is ridiculous. That's some pretty strong words. Cal Crutchlow wasn't exactly a slow rider. He was in MotoGP after all. But even after all this feedback, Honda didn't seem to care all that much. They were winning, and with Mark at the helm, that was all that mattered. But all good things must come to an end. And for Honda, it all came crashing down at Jerez in 2020.
Mark Marquez is down. He's gone again. Oh, that's a big crash. He's not saving that one. I hope he's all right because that's a fast one.
2020 was a funny year, as we all know, and the first race of the 2020 MotoGP season was held at Jerez. Marquez was looking good on pace as per usual, but he had an absolutely monster crash at turn 4 during the Spanish Grand Prix, and it put him out for what some people thought was for good. Countless surgeries, testing, and trying to race eventually put Marquez in a position where he had to take time away and recover. So at this point, Honda was left with what should have been a pretty easy choice to make. They still had several riders on the team, and the person that could ride the bike in its current form might never get back to racing full time again. It was time for Honda to make some changes and make the bike better for the team. However, Honda did the exact opposite, and several sources said development actually slowed down while Mark was away. They were trying to wait for him to come back to guide the direction of the bike development. The problem with that is while Honda was waiting around, every other manufacturer was moving forward. And that brings us to the next point. There's another main reason why Honda might never be able to get up the front of the grid in MotoGP again. And it's something that's embedded within the culture of Honda themselves. In MotoGP and any other prototype racing series, innovation is key. But what's probably more important is innovating quickly. Honda did really well back in the 80s and 90s, when they had more time to develop the bikes. But in the modern day and age of racing, manufacturers need to move fast, and more importantly, fail fast. If something doesn't work, they need to try something new. But this just isn't the Honda way. Let's take Ducati, Aprilia, and KTM for example. They're all miles ahead of Honda. Take a look at these race results. Regularly, the Ducatis finish over 30 seconds ahead of the Hondas in a 40-minute race. They all innovate fast. If something isn't working and riders give some feedback, they make a change and try again. Sometimes they make changes so quickly, you'll see changes race by race. Being a nimble and agile team is key. Honda, on the other hand, deliberate constantly. They have countless meetings and their committees take up so much time and energy, they're so much slower in comparison to the other manufacturers when it comes to making changes. It needs to be perfect before it goes out the door. And while that might have worked in the past, just doesn't work now. So where does Honda go from here? Personally, I don't have the answer. But from the outside looking in, it doesn't take much to realize that what other manufacturers are doing is working. Honda needs to do something radically different if we want to see them back on top form again, which hopefully will happen. If you want to learn more about how MotoGP is going to be changing in the near future, which could very well help Honda get back to the top, click on this video here.